and I'm going to call the Community Impact Grants Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, if you call the roll.
Brenham,
Here.
Livingston. Here. Barron. Mackey,
Here.
English. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to make sure I acknowledge Councilman Don Weaver for joining us today. And then, do we have any other council members online?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from April 4th.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote.
Brenham,
Recording in progress.
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes,
Motion approved.
thank you. Next is the adoption of the agenda. Do we have any additions, deletions to the agenda presented today?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Brenham,
Yes.
Livingston.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, the first and only item on the agenda today is the proposed FY24 Community Impact Grant application. And wanted to just start off with just a reminder, it's been a few weeks since we've had our last committee meeting related to community impact grants. And we started out where we kind of set aside an agreed amount of funding that we wanted to use for this upcoming fiscal year. And then the committee decided that we would take our next step in developing the application process and agreed upon a schedule of saying that by May 31st, we would be complete with the application in committee and be able to move forward to full council. So between our last meeting and today, I have received a few comments and thoughts from council members as it relates to the application process and thoughts on criteria for the application. And so I wanted to use this time to talk about the application that is in our packet on pages 4 through 7, and then also have conversations related to the criteria for the community impact grant funding that will be released for FY24. The application that is in our packet is not a completely new application, but it is one that has a combination of applications that we have used in other grants. So when we look at hospitality grant funding, when we used our ARPA application, this application uses a lot of those similar questions that we have used in other grant periods. So one, it's not a complete redo for our staff, but then two, it's not a complete redo for organizations that may be applying for the funds. But it does incorporate a few new pieces of it that we think might make it a little unique to the community impact grant phase, as well as suggestions that we've received from council members. So I want to first hand it over to ACA Thomas to see if there's any kind of overall thoughts that she would like to share as her staff have kind of worked in the past with these grants, and then would like to open it up to committee members after that for any additional thoughts related to application and criteria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In general, in looking at the budget, or I mean at the application, I believe the first parts of it were for the demographics and questions about projects and things of that nature are relatively relatively normal and what would be expected. When we do get down to things like the budget, and I think there may need to be a distinguishing fact there as to whether the committee would like to see the total budget of the organization or the budget of the project or both, and how that fits into the budget of the organization. Whether it's something else that might be considered there is whether it's a new program or an existing program. the required documents, I think, that would be something also that would be a sort of a non-starter for organizations that do not submit those, that if they are not included, they would not go on from that point with the application and review. Another thing would be to consider how, as you're looking at these items, the project would be sustained beyond the first year if it is a new project. And if it is a new project, how, as you requested there, what would be your key performance indicators, rather than just asking what their outcomes would be what, how do you measure your success? Tell us what the key performance indicators are there. So those are some of the thoughts that staff has relative to this. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of that.
Okay, thank you. Any initial thoughts from committee members as it relates to the proposed application before we kind of walk through it? Any overall thoughts you want to share? Councilman Brandon, you recognized?
Thank you. I certainly do have thoughts, but I'm happy to wait to share them if you prefer to go specific later in our process today.
So literally, all I was going to do is kind of walk through the questions in order as they were. And, if you want to say anything, you can. But if not, then kind of move on. But I think overall, staff mentioned this is generally kind of normal information that's been used in other applications. Did want to point out for question number 4, are you applying for a countywide or district grant? This is not something that is included in other applications. It's something that was suggested by a council member, that when we look at community impact grant funding and tying it to our strategic plan, making sure that we're equitable and how we support organizations through our county, to have a question in here that relates to, is this a countywide grant, meaning that is this funding related to a program that is countywide, or is this funding related to a program that maybe only benefit a specific zip code or a specific district? And I think part of that is to look at, when we do go through awarding, we can kind of see, okay, are we funding all districts? There may not be districts that have applications that come in, but this is something we can look at to say, do we want to make sure we're setting aside funds that are district specific to make sure that all districts are getting an impact? So that's definitely, I would love to hear committee feedback. And then question 5, which impact areas will your project serve? And so these: affordable housing, education, recreation, workforce development, and food insecurity have been key areas that have all somehow been talked about in our strategic plan, and areas that we as a body have agreed that we would like to see improvement in, and really would like to focus to help move the community forward. And so really, when we look at community impact grant funding, making sure that we are funding organizations that will help us achieve the goals in the community we want to see, not just necessarily funding events or celebrations, but really organizations that might help us, make a dent in affordable housing, or help us achieve recreation or address food insecurity issues. So,
The only thing I thought of at that part,
Mr. Livingston?
that one might create a problem. Sometimes if someone just simply says, I'm impacting on all of those, and I'm trying to focus on something specific, so it can be interesting, And it may be they grant me impact on 20% on one, 40% on the other, so I don't know what kind of confusion that might be.
Well, I think that would be a good problem versus if their program doesn't address any of these. So I think if even if they address 2 or 3, I think that's better than saying they address none of them. But I definitely, if that's something you think we need to look at as far as criteria, or if you want to say, you need to be only in one, or if you want to have it more specific.
I'm fine with it.
Councilman Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't know if I could ask questions, not being on the
No,
committee or
yes, you
not,
can.
but-
No, you can. Yes.
My only question on number 5, it says what impact area, we might want to think about adding an other category. For instance, one group I've been talking to, Pathways to Healing, helps victims of sexual trauma, and I don't really know how that would fit in one of these 5 categories. Like, should we add an other category and maybe ask for them to explain it in case their group doesn't fit into one of these? I don't know what rape trauma would fall under here.
Mr. Livingston, you recognize that, Mr. Branham?
Well, what happened if we did that, because we, council decided to focus on certain areas, you may get folks with ideas that are totally irrelevant to, completely irrelevant to this. And put in other categories, so you may not, with all these others you gotta deal with, when you know they weren't a part of the main categories you're looking for.
Okay.
It's one of the concerns I'd have if you left it other wide open, and other might be, take.
Hopefully not.
And I will say, the organization that you mentioned has already been identified in one of our 9 community partners that we did agree
Okay.
before. So there were 9 organizations that we agreed as a body would get funding. They would still need to do an application, but that they would get funding, and that was one of them. But that is a conversation. If there, like you said, others, we may want to figure out how we want to address that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Branham?
Thank you. Yeah, I just on the same point, number 5, and maybe also to somewhat address the question raised by Councilman Weaver. I think this kind of calls attention, number one, big picture wise, to the fact that, for one, Councilman Weaver and I have been on for like 4 months, and so we weren't here to vote on that strategic plan that the prior council voted on. And, generally, I love the concept of it, and I like a lot of what I've seen and heard about from it. And I even appreciate the fact that there is an effort to align this application with what I saw in that plan. As I was looking over it too, I thought to myself, though, under this area number 5, when it comes to government, generally speaking, governments are empowered to enact laws that work to promote like health, safety, general welfare. And certainly these items that are here, I think all speak to one of those types of categories. But that's where I'm looking at, maybe health and safety should also be on here. Maybe not something specific to law enforcement, though it could be. I'm just thinking in my head, like, what if we could help fund neighborhood cameras, security cameras and things like that? That would be an impact on a community that would help promote safety, for example. And then potentially an organization like the one that Councilman Weaver raised earlier would go to health. So it's a little bit awkward for me to come here after not voting on that strategic plan. And sometimes the majority rules regardless. Like maybe I would have voted no and I would still be needing to work somewhat within the strategic plan. There's the strategic plan, and then there's also still what local governments are authorized to do. And so I could see it being a valid suggestion that we add health and safety potentially as items under that section 5 there.
Any other thoughts?
I'm more amenable to something specific like that.
Sorry. Mr. Livingston, can you say that again in the mic? We had, our viewers online couldn't hear you.
Do something more specific like that rather than an other section though, because that leaves it too wide open.
Thank you. ACA Thomas or Attorney McLean, as we go through this and suggestions are made, do we need a motion to make changes to this?
I wasn't here to previous meetings. I'm assuming you didn't do anything quite as formal as voting on a draft at the, so.
No, this is the draft. There was nothing before. This is literally the draft.
So, you can, it's still at committee level. it would have to go to council. I would suggest that if you're gonna make major changes, and if they've already, if anything's already been to council, obviously we'd need, okay, so then, if you're all amenable, you don't even need, you don't have to do anything as formal as a motion, but if you appear to be, in opposition of each other, I'd do a motion just to make sure that the will of the body is kept. But if you're just chatting amongst yourselves and everybody seems to be okay, then I think you're fine, because it's still at
Well,
the draft stage.
Thank you. So I'll say for the record that I'm okay with health and safety as a category.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm happy to make a motion on anything. I did want to wait, though, until
Okay.
we discussed everything all the way. I've just made some notes and may come back to motion later.
Okay. So going through the others, 6 through 11 are just the general questions that we use on all applications just to get general, project information. So nothing is different there. And then when you,
Do we make that one question, say, start and the end date, as opposed to two questions, or does it need to be two questions? I don't know.
ACA Thomas?
I think it would need to be two questions. Number one is to make certain that it starts and ends within the fiscal year, but also so that if there is any kind of a deviation, like that it begins and then it would come back at some point, let's say it's a school program where it might stop for a period of time and then come back, they can actually give us an end date, and that also helps us to monitor a little more closely. If we know somebody's project should be ending, if we've not received anything or if we've not received a report, then we have a good idea that we probably need to reach out to find out why not.
I wasn't suggesting we leave one or the other one out. I was just suggesting instead of having 6 and 7, you just have, that is the same sentence or whatever.
Yes, sir, we'll drop this into an Excel sheet, and so it's easier to fill it into two boxes, if you don't mind. It's easier to tell somebody how to do that, if that's agreeable to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Councilwoman English. How are you? Good, good. All right, then moving on to where we get to the benefit to the community, including the number of persons served, demographics of the audience served, and geographic location of those served. That gives us a little bit more detail of the actual program impacts. Sustainability, what efforts are being made to increase sustainability of this project and decrease the reliance on county community impact grant funds. This is one where staff has recommended that we kind of look at making sure that we include some language that addresses what happens for organizations to be able, do they have a plan to sustain it? For instance, if this is a new program and they get this grant this first year, can this organization, do they have a plan to sustain it, or to basically not create a reliance on the county grants? I think ultimately, the community impact grant program, we want to be able to help organizations, but I think we want to make sure that we are helping them achieve a goal, but then also being able to help a diverse set of organizations, that we're not always funding the same ones year after year after year, and not able to maybe bring in some new organizations to help make impacts in the community. So this would really be showing, can you sustain this after funding? ACA Thomas?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a reminder, because I know some of the members here were not here previously when we did have the discretionary program that existed. The discretionary program was only a single year funding at a specific maximum amount, or a specific maximum amount over 3 years for a program that might need a little more help. So that might be a consideration as well, is to determine at some point in time, not necessarily in the application, but as we look at the process and the terms of the application, how long would the council consider funding? Is there a maximum amount? And lastly, if there's multiple years, what's the maximum number of years and the maximum amount in that arrangement as well? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And if the body is okay, I would like staff to be able to maybe add some additional language for 13 that addresses the concern of maybe after year one, how does the organization plan to continue on? Ms. Ms. English, and then Councilman Branham.
Thank you. And just going back to what you said, one of the things that the DD Council does now, and these are federal grants, we do 3 years. And the first year, 75-25, which is the match that comes through. The second year is 65-35, and then the third year is 50-50. So it goes down each year, but it allows them to come up with their own sustainability. And this is where the DD Council comes in, because if there's something that needs to be extended, then they'll come back to the council and explain that. So that's an option when you're talking about 1, 2, and 3 years, and not funding them for the full amount every year. So you have those funds that are kind of rolling off and that are still available for other people to come through.
Madam Chair, if I may, to
Yes.
respond to Ms. English, that is a point that the committee may consider, is there a match requirement for these organizations? The county has in the past not had something of that sort, and they're discretionary, but it is not uncommon. I know that any grants that the county receives from sources other than the ARPA grant, we typically do have some sort of match to actually make us more accountable as to the uses of the funds. So that is something the council could consider, the committee could consider.
Skin in the game. This is what my organization is doing. It's not just you fund everything and we don't do anything.
Councilman Branham?
I just wanted to voice really support the sentiment, I think, behind that number 13, that item. I like the idea of us being sparks and maybe funding incubators, if you wanted to call it that, just to help charitable organizations get going and to establish themselves in that direction of self-sustainability. I like some of what I was hearing there from Councilwoman English about that federal program that she helps administer at the state level. Just that decreasing at a set percentage over the years. I also don't want to create a lot more red tape for Richland County government, and I don't really want to add more meetings for Richland County Council or more time commitments for Richland County Council. So anyway, just a general comment, but I really appreciate the thought behind that line item number 13 being there.
Okay. And then the next 14, describe your partnership efforts with similar organizations in Richland County that assist in furthering the mission of your organization. I know this was something, Ms. English, that we had talked about, that you had made a suggestion about making sure there was an inclusion of partnerships listed. And so that's in here as well, to talk about partnerships so that organizations are working with others in the community. Yes, ma'am.
Trying to explain what I mean by that. If I am producing, let's say I'm working with mental health, and I'm saying I'm going to provide counseling, then I need Babcock to say, we have some children, and we can partner with you to make sure that these children that are already assessed can come through the system, or other organizations. And it's not just, I'm saying, oh yeah, I like them, fund them, but actually working with those partnerships and organizations that would have a part in your organization and be able to provide some accountability for that.
Thank you. ACA Thomas?
Yes, ma'am, if I may ask a clarifying
Yes.
question for any change. Councilwoman English, would this be, so would it be fair to say, describe the partnership efforts with similar organizations in Richland County for this project? So we're being specific, correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And then I think the other topic that was brought up is outcomes. do we want to add some more specific parameters related to key performance indicators, how they're actually going to show us that they've achieved what they said they're going to achieve? Councilman Branham?
I do think that we should at least get some kind of commitment of willingness to participate in an audit if requested, or to submit some kind of report after the fact. I don't know if today's the day to get into performance indicators, but at least some sort of commitment to report after the fact. I think that would be good to have on the application.
A.C. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Mackey, if we approve the application, or if we come to a point where we have the application at a form where we would be ready to move it to council, we could then move forward with the actual procedures and process, sort of an informational page that would accompany the application as a separate document, if that would be something that you all would like to spend a little more time on. That's just one thought, or we could, take a chance at setting that up. So that would be an option as well.
Let's see how much we get through today, and then we can kind of decide which way to move forward. Mr. Branham, did you have any other thoughts? Was that?
Not on that, thank you.
Okay. And then I think the only other recommendation staff had was related to budget. And we have the expense categories and income sources, but we don't have in here a question where we're specifically asking about total budget that the organization has, as well as what that project budget is in relation to their total budget. And I believe, and A.C. Thomas, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the thought in this is to get information to see is the amount of funding that is being requested, would what we award basically be 90% of the organization's entire budget? And if so, that may be concerning if Richland County is majorly funding this organization's entire budget. Is that correct, A.C. Thomas?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct. That's the consideration that we were giving there. Another would be to determine if potentially, another option might be to consider if there were certain activities that the council would like to redline as not being allowable expenses, that we would not pay the normal if the rent, for instance, is in their normal activities, that could not be considered a project activity. The same with staff. You would only allocate staff that were associated specifically with the project, not the staff that may be those that were to be in existence. We may also consider asking for maybe a 2-year budget history for the organization as well.
Any committee thoughts on additional information tied to budget? I do think the idea of seeing the total budget versus project budget is good for us to know going into, so we can really think about how much we're funding an organization. Any other thoughts from my committee members on budget? Okay, I think we've hit all of staff concern. Mr. Branham, did you want to go over yours?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few thoughts that, I don't know, are almost potentially disclaimers or just things that I feel like it might be nice to have the applicant acknowledge. One is something like this grant is not an indication of intent to provide future funding. Another thought was just to put some cautionary language on there regarding any misrepresentations of fact in the application. Another was, should we request any sort of proof of insurance of any type? And then just sort of a commitment and promise to use the money for the purposes, and if they don't do it within the permitted timeframes, then they would return the money to the county.
ACA Thomas.
Ms. Mackey, so again, Mr. Branham, you probably would not be aware because you had not participated in this. These are, we will only fund 25% of an award up front. Beyond that, it's made in reimbursement installments to the groups. So that at any point in time, if they don't meet the commitments, and there is reporting and things of that nature that are required, if at any point in time they don't meet the commitments, then they would not receive any further funding. We would have the ability to claw back, if possible, from the organization. But I think those are very important things for you to know, that we do think about those things.
Welcome to Councilmember Teratio. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
Madam Chair.
Yes, you're recognized.
Could I get any additional input? Thank you, ACA Thomas. Thank you for that information on that particular item. Would there be any other feedback as it relates to proof of insurance?
A lot of that would be relevant to the particular project and what they're doing. If they have employees, of course, we would want to know that and we're required to have workers' compensation insurance. It might be a good idea to have that review, but I'd be happy to run that through risk management, and that would be part of what would be in the application agreements. When they do that, that would be a disclaimer there, and as they sign it, even electronically, they would commit to that. Additionally, when these are awarded, there is a grant award letter that goes out that all of the specifications are spelled out in that. Also, if they fail to meet, or under current guidelines, and this would be something that could be considered, if they fail to meet any of the requirements of the grant, they would not be eligible for future funding.
Thank you very much. I think that's helpful, and I'm glad to hear there's other paperwork. It sounds like maybe that the applicant signs off on throughout the application process. I just used the bathroom in this building, and there's a sign on the wall that says if you steal the toilet paper, you might be prosecuted. So just another reason why I thought we could go ahead and put something on the application to make sure that people know we're serious, and there may be consequences if there's a misrepresentation of fact in the application. That would be one of my higher priorities of the items that I just listed. Otherwise, I feel like the strongest about just under item number 5, seeing that health and safety were added as options to the application. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to shift to criteria. We've spent a good bit of time on the application, and I want to talk a little bit about criteria, because we have not, as a committee, kind of discussed what this will look like, and really want to start nailing this down and at least be able to give ACA Thomas some ideas and direction we want to go into, so that our next meeting we can have a more formalized process. As mentioned previously in the discretionary grant committee, there was an option for 1 year or up to 3 years of funding. And as a committee, we need to decide if that's a structure that we would like to continue with, or if, we go a different model. I think Ms. English mentioned 3-year funding, but the percentages would be reduced along the 3 years. That's not something that we did before. Or if we just want it to be an outright 1 year only and make no commitments of funding for future years. So I think that is definitely a starter of even understanding at what point we want to do, if we want to do multiple year funding, but then also thinking about funding limits. Do we want to set a funding limit right now that's saying we won't give more than X dollar amount per year to an organization, or do we want to have a little bit more complexity to that, and depend on project or area, is the dollar amount increased? And so I would like to talk a little bit about the criteria piece as we look to kind of setting the parameters for the process. Councilman Branham?
So just as a confirmation to myself, we previously identified, was it the equivalent of 1 mil That was going to be the total budget?
That is the total budget up to 1 mil. That is the total budget for this committee at this time.
Which is currently equivalent to roughly, was it 1.87 million?
1.78 million.
78 million. Okay. I
That's
just
what's in the
realized, yeah, thank you. I just became diagnosed as mildly dyslexic. Thank you.
Okay. English, did you have a?
I'm agreeing with you with those, putting parameters in place. Nothing is definitive because there are always those agencies and organizations when you're working with children especially that can shift, if you know what I mean. We can start out this way, but then those changes need to be noted. You know, we took on 21 children at first, and the program is so popular now, 41 children want to come on. So yes, that's a excellent, way to increase that funding because you have more children participating in that program.
I guess, so are you, with that comment, are you saying that you are in favor of 1 year only and each year coming back? And like you said, if they increase in that way, are you in favor of multiple year commitments? I just want to clarify your comment, that's all.
1 year at full funding, 1 year. But if we do multiple years, then the reduced funding.
Okay, so going back to a model of, and when we talk about this previously, when we did discretionary, you could check the box for 3-year funding, but you still would have to apply the next year, and council would still have to vote on it. It's not a guarantee, but in the application, it is noted that your program was submitted as a 3-year program, and, pending that you did everything you're supposed to do and you showed it, then, council would still have to vote on it again. And so what I hear you saying is that you like the 3-year model, but maybe reduce funding after year 1, or some type of fraction thereof.
You guys have to forgive me because I've been doing that for the last 10 years, so.
Okay.
With the federal program. And so in my mind, stuff like that has just kind of been set in stone. The parameters, everything that we go through, the requirements. You can't spend our funds on file cabinets or TVs or anything that would walk away at the end of the program. It has to be spent on programmatic things, so.
Any thoughts on funding limits?
Madam Chair,
Councilman Branham.
I haven't spent much time thinking about this, but I'm just going to throw out a number, 25,000? I don't know. How would people react to that?
Mine is 40.
Speak in the mic, please, Mr. Livingston. Our online viewers are having trouble hearing you.
Applications first. I hate to see someone with this wonderful, great application, and I'm limiting the funding, and when I think it would be the best interest of the county, so.
Well, I will say, we know our budget is only 1.87. So I do think we have to put a cap because we cannot have an organization come in asking for 500,000. Does that make sense? Like, I don't think I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's what we're set up to do. So I do think we need to give some realistic parameters so that organizations aren't wasting their time in this huge effort in a program that's going to cost $400,000 that we're just not going to approve because that would take up, a huge chunk of this.
We know we're not going to approve it.
And we know we're not going to approve it. So I would at least like to set some type of cap so that we're setting expectations so organizations can decide about the effort that they want to put into this. Councilwoman Teresa, you recognize?
Yeah, I just want to say that, if we're looking at such a large number, like a $400,000, $500,000 investment in a partner, then that's probably, we probably need to look at it makes that some kind of like a higher priority that we would probably need to look at in some other way. Like if that's something we really, really wanted to do, to me it doesn't fit into this, the scope of this work. So just wanted to add that.
Madam Chair, if I may.
ACA Thomas, thank you.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, there are also the groups that we have named. Would they be held to those same limits would also be a question that we would have to ask. at the current funding level, if it were $25,000 each, you're looking at the potential to fund about 70 groups. But that would need to be a consideration, is how much money, how will this be divided?
And let me just clarify, and just to remind everybody, so we, as a body, previously voted on 9 organizations that we, for lack of a better term right now, refer to as community partners, organizations that we committed to funding in the community impact grant category. We did not agree to a funding amount for them, but we did agree to funding them. And we agreed that, of course, they would still have to submit an application and provide proof, but that we agreed to funding them. And so knowing that, what ACA Thomas is pointing out is that there are already 9 organizations that we probably do need to almost back into this number and saying, okay, with these 9 organizations, what dollar amount are we setting aside total that we'll give to these 9 organizations? And then the rest of that is what really is open and available for other organizations to apply for. That is another decision with funding that we would need to make. Livingston? Okay, great. All right.
But right now, though, okay, I got you. Yeah. I think we do need to keep the number low, I guess, for these grants, since we already have those other organizations that we consider priority ones.
Ms. English?
I was just wondering, ACA Thomas, do we have a list of what we've already funded those agencies at, a current list? Or can we get that maybe next time?
I can provide that to you, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. It would just give us a better perimeter of what we're looking at. That's
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Can I go ahead and just say an estimate of what that amount to be? So just kind of going off of memory in these previous organizations, they are probably total close to about $900,000 that we had previously funded them at.
Vice Chair, a couple of those agencies may not have been funded previously as well, so.
Correct, yes. Councilman Branham.
That would be about half the budget, right? That would leave other 900,000 roughly. Thomas?
Well, given that there are a couple of organizations that have not received funding in the list that Ms. Mackey is referencing, depending on the level at which you choose to fund those, it would probably be more in the range of 2/3 of your money.
I'm sorry, so the ones I'm thinking of are ones that I know we funded, and so there are a few that were, right, that we did not fund last year, so it's not in that
So we
number.
might have about $500,000.
And I will say, the committee did not commit to funding them at previous year's level. We committed to funding them, but we did not agree to a funding amount. So that, I want that to be clear, there was no commitment made about funding amount. It was just that we would fund them. And so we do need to determine now, what is that amount that we can set the parameter on? Because, we could easily say, that's it, 50%, right? Or we could say 40% goes to those groups. And whatever that splits out to be is what it is, and then the rest of the 60% goes to new and other organizations.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
So again, if we just were to say the partners were to get half, and that was 900, if that left 900, that was still, if we capped grants at 25,000 and we gave max grants to everybody, that would still give us an opportunity to help 36 different organizations in addition to the community partners. Is that roughly right there on that math, Ms. Thomas?
Yes, sir, that's close.
Thank you.
Okay, so the other thing I'm just going to throw out there now as we continue to think about this is going back to question number 4, as it relates to countywide or district-specific grants, and looking at when looking at criteria. And for example, an organization that is countywide, would their program be maybe, their program receive more than 25,000 versus a program that is only one district specific? Councilwoman English, okay.
Can we just,
Well, Councilwoman English is recognized right now, Ms. Livingston.
And y'all being selfish right now because my district is so large, I'm gonna say no. My district is huge, and just to give you an idea, I left Olympia on Tuesday. I went to St. Andrews and Clemson Road, and when I left there, I had to go to Screaming Eagle Road. Down Screaming Eagle to Cross Hill to another neighborhood association meeting. So, you know, it's just huge. My district is different from the rest. So what someone else needs may just be a small amount. If it's wide, I get it, but it's also based on district too, if that makes any sense. District needs.
I think we're saying the same thing. My question was, if it is countywide, meaning if you're an organization that's helping the entire county, should you be able to get more than 25,000 versus an organization that's just helping one district? That was my question, because if you are organizations that's helping, District 11 and 10 versus maybe somebody else is helping all, and I'm just putting that out there. Like I said, as we look at criteria, if they check this, is there anything that should come from that? Is there anything that goes to an organization that is countywide, or do we just want to say, hey, if you are focused on the zip code, we appreciate you focused on the zip code, and we're going to give you, the same amount of money? Mr. Livingston, did you have something?
yeah, or we could just say up to a certain amount, and obviously when we look at the application, if it's only representing a district, then that up to a certain amount could be lower. If it's up to $25,000 or $30,000, and it have to be just a district application, then you can put it at a lower level.
Councilman Branham?
I just think on the same line of conversation, I'm looking back at the wording here. Are you applying for a countywide or district grant? I guess, is the district grant meant to mimic the old days and how?
No, nothing is meant to mimic the old days.
Okay. If so, maybe we would word it differently and say which district will benefit from the project, or which district is intended geographic focus of the project, the grant?
Yeah, I think the wording can be changed. The intent was going back to strategic plan and looking for equity across grant funding. And so previously in applications, this was not something that was pointed out. We didn't look at maybe if organizations were helping maybe some of our districts that were more in need. And so this was looking at equity to make sure that as we evaluate applications, are we making sure to really make sure all districts or all parts of the county are receiving funds to help with areas. Yes, sir, Ms. Livingston?
Number 4, can we just change it to read, are you applying for a countywide or district-specific grant? And then you have those options, and you don't need any other language, really.
They say, Thomas, is that enough for?
I think what we could do is just strike the "are you applying for a countywide or district grant" and make it which district is the geographic focus of this project, and then just have your drop-down boxes.
But if it's all, then what?
It would be countywide.
Okay, got it. Does that work, Mr. Livingston? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Now, countywide will be an option too, with the Dropbox?
It would be, and we can put all out there in parentheses so that they'd understand what countywide means.
Would they be able to select more than one, like, so if it's District, 3 and District 8, are they able to select that? Okay.
Yes.
Well, you put by district, put it, that's in parentheses.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say I like
Yes.
that. I like that.
Like that? Okay, great. Everybody likes that. Okay, so want to go back, see if I heard a consensus on funding. Are we saying 50%? So 50% goes to community impact partners, up to 50% to the identified list of 9 community partners organizations. And then the other 50% would be available for new applications. Is that, everyone feel in agreement about that?
Well, I just think those agencies. When you spread out most of it, it gets lost in different places. You don't have the same impact, so wouldn't want to spend that much on small agencies.
You said you
Just
want
not
more,
being-
you want more than 50%? Is that what you're saying?
Of that pool of money, yes.
Okay,
For the
well,
organizations
what is your
that
percentage?
have because they have a great countywide impact. That's my concern.
So your percentage is 55? What's your percentage? 60/40 is your percentage?
We got some new groups in there we got to add to it.
Councilman Branham?
Again, I'm new here, but I feel like Councilman Livingston's words resonate in my understanding of the value that the organizations identified as community partners bring to the county, and so I would be happy to support something that said up to, and then a number up there, maybe 60% it is. I definitely want to reserve an opportunity for others, but I also certainly want to value the fact that we have identified them as community partners for good reason.
Okay. I'm hearing up to 60% for the 9 community partners that were listed. And then the remaining 40% would be for other organizations that are not on that list. And then I've heard up to $25,000 per application. I personally would like to see a little more. I don't think you can do much with $25,000. And I understand that does limit organizations funded, but I do think in this situation, it is more about quality over quantity. And if we could see some really good initiatives and we can really give or partner with an organization to make an impact, in a 2-year period, I think that's great, rather than just, giving $10,000 here and there for the next 6 or 7 years. Councilwoman English.
My number is like 40,000. I just feel like that's a solid number. And they could work with that.
Want to keep them up to, because
Up to.
you still may have one that get 10, 20, whatever, but just up to, we think they warrant that much.
Madam Chair, I'd
Yes, sir.
be in agreement with that.
Would anybody be in agreement with up to 50,000?
$45, no.
No. That's not the kind of meeting I'm trying to lead today.
I don't have a problem with that. I just feel like what you said about 25 may not be enough, but it depends on what we're doing, and 40 to 50 is a substantial number to get some work done. in using Councilman Livingston's terminology, up to.
Up to 50,000 per year. Sorry, up to $50,000 per application. And then we discussed about it being more than having the 3-year option. I think we went back and forth about that, having a 3-year funding option. And Ms. English mentioned reduced percentages after year 1. And so we do need to decide, do we just want to say 1 year and just evaluate them again every year, or do we want to put the 3-year language in there now?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'll totally I get outvoted on this, but I like the idea of simplicity for this nascent initiative by the county. A multi-year, I'm just concerned that it's going to create a need for greater administration and payroll costs and maybe more meetings. So I understand we're a multi-year. There's lots of value, I'm sure, in lots of multi-year programs, but I'd like to start at 1 year and then maybe just see how we develop with time and experience.
Livingston? Yes, sir.
Well, even if you don't say multiple years, it still could be because they could apply again next year, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's more so, do we want to set the expectation out here that that is what we're doing or not? I think that's just, do we want to put that out there? Or do we just want to say 1 year? Okay. So Mr. Livingston's good with 1 year. I'm good with 1 year. Ms. English seems to be okay with that. And, you know, this is our first year with the Community Impact Grant funding, and we can change our application next year. After this first year, if we see that we need to do something different, we can still change it. So for the first year, let's do 1 year. We have 2 minutes. So A.C.A. Thomas, do you feel like you have good direction on all of these items?
Yes, ma'am, so that would be full funding for the project. There's no participation in the, okay. Yes, ma'am, I think I have a clear idea, and I think I can draft a good letter that would go with this as well to propose to you, and be happy to circle it around tomorrow.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, is there something? Okay.
I'm sorry. Chairman Mackey, did you want this item to go to the council on the 16th?
Oh, ma'am.
Okay, thank
So
you.
at this point, we do we have another meeting scheduled yet? No, okay. So I do think we probably need to, do we? Everyone's checking.
We
Yes,
do,
ma'am. We
on the
do.
25th.
That's what I
yes.
thought. I thought I made one. Okay, so I think A.C.A. Thomas is going to compile all this, our edits, and then bring it back to us with a kind of a process and criteria, as well as this updated application, with the goal of, at the committee meeting on the 25th, that we would be able to give any final recommendation and changes at that point to do an official vote to then send to council. And then we would still be on track of meeting our deadline of getting this out of committee by May 31st. All right, well, I think this was a good discussion today, and I appreciate everyone's participation. And so we're at item number 5.
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn, since y'all are so productive.
Second.
Motion is second. Madam Clerk?
Branham,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.